Katie, and welcome to Open Invite, a space that celebrates friendship, life, and what lies between. In today's episode, I wanted to explore some of the recent insights I have had around forgiveness. I was on the phone with my sister a few days ago, and we were talking about change and the frustration that comes when people won't let you grow from a past mistake. As I thought more about this idea of seeing someone in a new light, I realized that a big part of allowing people to change is forgiveness. Before recording this episode, I asked people what came to mind when they heard the word forgiveness. The responses were pretty consistent: uncomfortable, unnatural, challenging. I understood that because forgiveness has often felt complicated to me too. As a product of Catholic school, I've been learning about forgiveness for most of my life, as well as the importance of the Golden Rule. And that can feel really confusing when we live in a society that encourages people to keep receipts. But what about that feels good? What makes holding a grudge feel more natural than letting something go? I think many of us can think of someone that feels hard to forgive. I think about some of the bullies I have encountered and how sometimes it feels easier to just believe that they're bad people. Yet I also know life is more complicated than that. So I've spent the better part of the past few years wanting to understand what it feels like to really forgive someone. When I was in college, I took a class in which we read stories about people who had an extraordinary capacity to forgive. And what I found challenging was that I didn't understand what it was that allowed them to build that capacity. I just thought there was something wrong with me that letting go felt so counterintuitive. Granted, I also grew up in friendships where people kept receipts. Every mistake felt remembered. Many arguments reached back into the past. And trying to explain myself did little to erase another person's hurt. So rather than lose the connection, I decided to fight fire with fire. I have a pretty good memory, so when someone tried to use something against me, I started to hone in on collecting evidence of hurt. And it's sad how far that pulled me away from who I used to be, someone who liked to see the good in people. But I became someone who believed I needed those memories to defend myself if someone misunderstood me again. As I lost some of those connections, my relationship to forgiveness started to change. But that fear of being misunderstood never really went away. As friendships ended, my scarcity mindset started to kick in. I could offer others forgiveness, or at least I thought I did, but I didn't know how to allow others to forgive me. I started walking through life on eggshells, rushing to forgive others, even if it meant suppressing my own pain. And you know what happened? Those friendships ended too. It felt like a real lose-lose situation. And man, did all of that come up when I got into somatic healing. I realized I'd become really good at protecting myself, but not very good at feeling safe. Some of the most useful things I have learned about forgiveness came from my master teacher, the teacher I was placed with during my student teaching. In our kindergarten class, she would do an object lesson on forgiveness using bubbles. The bubble was a symbol of the problem, and when you apologized, you were making an active promise to try not to make the same mistake again. The recipient could then say, "I forgive you," but not, "It's okay." My master teacher was very adamant that you don't say it is okay when someone hurts you. But there was also another element. If you wanted to say "I forgive you," you had to be willing to let go of what happened. There's no getting in a future fight and bringing it up again. You're making the decision to let it go. When I brought this activity to my 5th and 6th grade classes, I offered, "I appreciate your apology," as an additional response for people that weren't ready to forgive yet. Since we often did this activity as a class, I wanted students to feel like there was something they could say to acknowledge the bravery it took to step in front of a group, but also the option to still process. I knew from my own experience that sometimes we don't feel ready, and that deserves a response too. I also added to my explanation the element of the residue that remains after a bubble pops. I think similar to how a wound can produce a scar, Forgiveness can sometimes remind us of things we've endured. This bubble activity has produced some really powerful conversations and chances for people to connect. I've heard that conflict can often allow for connection, and for students that took the activity seriously, there were times where I got to see genuine relief and new friendships begin. It's also given me a real glimpse into the reluctance people have to let other people change. Similar to the people I read about in my psychology class, there is a capacity element to forgiveness. Letting go of pain is incredibly vulnerable. In my own complicated experience, holding on to the pain has felt protective, and at times even crept into parts of my identity. It shifted the way I looked at and related to other people. And I think we have to be careful about the way we approach forgiveness, because forcing or shaming someone into it doesn't allow it to process. Not only is forgiveness a choice, it is a skill that takes active practice. I've noticed some parallels recently between practicing forgiveness and learning a new language. I've spent the past year practicing Italian, and there are a lot of moments that feel very frustrating. Learning Italian was something I started because my dad wanted someone to speak with. And over this past year, there were many moments where I questioned what I was doing. I couldn't remember words or how to conjugate. But little by little, things that felt exhausting started to feel familiar. I am not an expert or even remotely fluent after a year, but my capacity to understand Italian has increased. And I think that's where forgiveness can feel similar, because it involves learning to think about something in a different way. Even being able to sit with the pain is a place to start. Considering giving grace is uncomfortable at first, but over time it feels less like pressure and more like curiosity. And when you choose to forgive someone you want to keep in your life, you're giving them the chance to grow beyond the hurt. There was a story from a writing workshop I used to share with my 5th grade class about this tiny girl who slept in a shoebox every night. Doctors used to come and look at her and find that there was nothing wrong with her. So her parents kept her in the shoebox until a new doctor stopped by on a house visit and was horrified. How was she supposed to grow if you keep her in the shoebox? Each night he asked them to put her into a larger container. Each night they did, she grew until she was finally big enough to sleep in her own bed. And while the story was used to teach kids about giving their ideas room to grow, I've also thought about it a lot recently from the lens of forgiveness. When we continue to hold things against someone, where's the freedom to grow? If every version of someone is judged by their mistakes, how would any of us expand? We all want people to see who we are becoming, yet it is surprisingly hard to offer someone else that same gift. As I've practiced forgiveness over time, I have learned what does and doesn't work for me. Writing letters you don't intend to send can be a good first step, but I have found that it can also bring up a lot of pain. And reliving that pain before you're ready to do so can lead to extended grief later if the pain resurfaces. Grief and forgiveness are interesting that way. Neither seems to budge with force. What's actually worked best for me has been treating forgiveness more like an inquiry. I'll ask myself questions about why something hurts and what stories it is reinforcing. I set the intention that I want to be able to forgive, and then I allow life to show me what that looks like. It's uncomfortable at first, but I also realized that when I tried to rush forgiveness, I often didn't feel the sadness and anger that we're asking to be heard too. If you're looking for a good place to start practicing forgiveness, the first person I'd start with is yourself. Is there anything that you're holding on to that feels heavy? Is there any shame? What mistakes continue to live rent-free in your brain? Learning how to forgive myself was in some ways harder than learning how to forgive other people. I learned a lot about treating others the way I wanted to be treated, but I didn't really learn how to treat myself the way I had learned to treat others. I couldn't see the peace in offering myself forgiveness, nor did I believe I deserved it. There are people who are still mad at me, and I completely understand why. Why should I be able to let myself off the hook for that? And I think it all comes back to something many of us struggle with: change. When I make my sense of peace based on what other people think of me, I'm not ever going to have peace. Self-trust comes from allowing yourself to change, to feel safer, to heal and grow. And at some point, your evidence for forgiveness is in your actions if you really do feel sorry about what you did. Because a sorry is a promise to try to do better. And forgiving yourself involves giving yourself the chance to do so. And actively looking for proof that you haven't changed doesn't help. Trust me. I think similar to the way many of us have that person we find challenging to forgive, there are people that may feel that way about you. And that's something that's been really hard for me to accept. But I've learned how to do so without making it mean that I am unlovable. I have enough awareness that I can notice that hurt and actively live my life in a way that goes beyond it. People can change. Whether we're willing to let them is another question. And I also think it's important to say this: you don't have to forgive anyone. Some people may never apologize. Some people might not even realize they did something wrong. Some people may even tell you it was all your fault. I can choose to offer grace. I can try to understand what someone else was going through. Sometimes that's all I'm capable of. But that isn't the same thing as forgiveness. Letting go of my old story about someone and allowing them the chance to learn from their mistakes is work. Learning to feel safe without the armor can be expansive, if not also a bit scary. But I think the point of talking about all of this isn't to force people to forgive. At the beginning of this episode, I asked why holding on to a grudge can sometimes feel more natural than letting go. I think, at least for me, it's because holding on to hurt can feel protective. Curiosity has helped me loosen that grip. I want to become someone who can let people change because I want to be able to receive that same grace. And just because something feels hard doesn't mean it isn't worth exploring. I don't think forgiveness is about forgetting. I think it is more about making room for growth. And I think if we want to expand beyond our worst mistakes, perhaps it's a gift worth learning to give ourselves and each other. Thank you for listening. I hope as you move through the rest of your day, you might feel open to exploring what forgiveness means to you and embark on your own inquiry too.